find ourselves on a planet that works, but there are many to choose from, many that don't work. The more fundamental things, like the strength of the gravitational force, is something we can measure. We can tell you what it is, but we can't explain why, and that does require an explanation. And yes, it's true, it does work out very well. Stars don't collapse into black holes right away, for example. But given any sort of universe outside the known universe, like a multi-Big Bang theory, that's a kind of naturalistic explanation that we have every reason to believe is on the right track and would work. So, moving along from these grand scale arguments for why there might be a God, there's the arguments for our God, a particular version. Now, if I were in a debate with a particular faith, I'd come up with some specific examples, but in broad terms, the kinds of arguments that I hear are along the lines of how can you explain a particular miraculous event, a divinely inspired set of laws, miracles, faith healers, gods on earth, this sort of thing. And of course, I haven't looked at all of these proposals on my own. None of us have. So how do I dismiss them all out of hand? Well, I mean, I can only be so confident, but the ones that I have read about, they haven't jumped off the page at me as divinely inspired. And maybe it's just me, but I would expect, if we have a bunch of religions made by men, and one made by God, which is kind of a proposal most people will stick with, you would expect it to jump off the page, make you actually say, oh my God, this is above and beyond anything any human being could come up with. But everything I've read seems within the range of human thought. The older ones often seem the more primitive ones. It all fits as I would expect it. But that's usually not good enough. We'll get specific questions about how do you explain my particular circumstance, whatever miracles or one that have occurred. Again, trying to touch on the other phase. And to that, it's a very broad principle. Of course, whatever you're referring to is a rare event. Of course, it's going to have an explanation that is unlikely. If it weren't unlikely, that sort of thing would happen all the time. But what you've got to ask yourself is it so unlikely that given the entire population of the planet over, say, once every few hundred years, 1,000 years, these sorts of things occur, is it not at all possible that through some combination of exaggeration, confusion, misapprehension, hallucination, groupthink, mob mentality, lying, self-fulfilling prophecy, something like this couldn't occur? Because, of course, I have the unfortunate job of saying what we all know, that at best only one of us is right. It's possible we're all wrong. But at best, all but one of the faiths here today is mistaken for one of those reasons. So, are you so sure yours is so above and beyond everyone else's? I don't think so. So now that I've gotten that out of the way, it sounds a little bit depressing, I know. But I don't think it really is. So I'd like to devote a little bit of time to talking about the kinds of questions that I get asked from religious people when I say I'm not a believer. How am I doing for time, by the way?
You're at 7:01 and we have to 7:07.
All right, 6 minutes, that's about right. The first question I always get asked is, how do you know what the difference is between right and wrong? Shortly followed by, what's the point of life in general? I presume this is a combination of two things. First of all, when you've got something as nebulous as a God to base everything on, to serve as your foundation, you can point to God immediately for everything it seems to do. And of course, people brought up in a religious environment, a church, synagogue, whatever the case may be, you'll be taught to credit God with all of these things. So it comes as no surprise to me, but we do have some answers that don't fall back on God. They're not complete, they're not perfect, unfortunately. And the stories you'll hear tonight are probably going to be ones about hope and faith and redemption and justice, and we don't always have that. But I'd like to tell you a little about what we do have. Well, first let me just say, when people say something to me like, I couldn't live in a world without God, as somebody who's never believed, it comes across rather like saying, I wouldn't want to live in a world where I can't fly. You know, I'd love to fly. If it was taken away from me when I had it, I'd feel very disappointed, but I don't personally get the same reaction, the same sympathy out of it that I might otherwise. So I try and picture what it's like for a religious person. And maybe it's presumptuous, but I kind of use the framework of a romantic relationship. It's one that's unique, that is pervasive throughout your life, that's very deep and intimate. And I can totally understand how if I went to a happily married man and told him, your wife isn't who you think she is, you're deceiving yourself, obviously they wouldn't just not believe it, they wouldn't want to hear it, and I sympathize with that. So I don't just want to be the bearer of bad news. And I want to remind you, first off, that all the things that you justify as being part of God's creation are still there if God isn't. You know, the sun still rises, you still have friends and family, and that sort of thing is that's what gets me up in the morning. You know, I think it's a bit of a disservice to your friends and family to say that there's no point in life without God. It's true that you're not necessarily the center of the universe. You know, God's plan didn't revolve around you, according to my worldview anyway. But you still have those around you who care about you, and some people don't. So I think we're lucky. I think there is something there to appreciate. As for the moral question, I don't really consider it to be directly concerned with the existence of God, but it's brought up in every debate on religion without fail. And so I'll just say that it sounds a bit arbitrary to some people, I think. The answer is, of course, that evolution has guided a process wherein we've come to feel these feelings for one another, compassion and stewardship and whatnot. Because that's what works. And you say, well, some species eat their young in a pinch, so isn't that kind of arbitrary? And no, I don't think it is. We are a species that grew up in an environment where we would live in small groups with our families. We'd spend our entire lives in that situation. We would invest a great deal in our young and look after one another. It's no wonder that we love and care for each other so much. And at the same time, this highlights a massive hole in our morality, because you're all here listening to me today while children are starving in Africa. I'm here speaking. If someone in this audience was suffering in some way, had a heart attack on the spot, we'd all immediately stop what we're doing. But because it's out of sight and out of mind, and that's not something we had to deal with before, there's that blind spot. So it's not perfect. I wish it was, but it isn't. But there's a reason it basically works. And now that we're in a world where we do interact with larger communities, hopefully we can develop that same sense of compassion around the world and find our own place in life. I wish there's a lot more I'd like to cover, didn't have a chance, so I really encourage you to ask questions. I'm not on the boxes, you might have noticed, there's no atheist position here, or atheist as my board says, so I'm sure if you jot something in the margin, they'll point to me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you all very much for listening.
Is your God? And there is a mic on the table, I see there. So, in what form is your God?
No. I can't see them when it says there.
That's a simple question to answer. In our culture, we first find ourselves in the center of our heart. To experience love in its purest form. Right from there, once you connect with that, you connect with the universal energy from one end of the universe to the other. And in that place, you're in the place of what we know as God as a creator. And it's the most beautiful place to be able to walk in that place, to think in that place, to work in that place, and to exist in that place of pure love, peace, and unity with all things at all times. It's a beautiful place to be. It's a total freedom within. So it's very easy. You find yourself there, and you will find God. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to allow at this point that's somewhat on topic, There's a number of them here that aren't, and I apologize.